we turn our attention to what might be called the libertarian left, or more popularly, anarchism.
This is the same logic shared by Marx and Freud.
Functioning libertarian socialist institutions, I think they are an interesting model that I think is highly relevant.
Am I saying hello as well?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, cold open. So I finally quit my job after 3.5 years.
Finally, especially famously, Hannah and I live together. It's part of our arc. And it was just absolutely horrible because you were just confined to the top floor of our house for hours. You were like the beautiful version of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, just locked up on top of our house, unable to leave.
I will say, so my job was working from home because I started it during COVID, and then they never brought us back into the office. They said you could come in, and at that point I was like, no, I'm already committed to the home life. But that meant I'd never met like half the people. So saying goodbye to them all was so odd.
Did you especially want to meet them?
I don't know. I would have liked to not work at... Okay, controversial take. I liked home working for the flexibility it gave me, but it does make you miserable at times. Yeah.
Standard academic response, I like homework.
Like, I would have liked to, I don't know. The office was so, like, it's on campus, but it's 20 minutes from here. So it's, like, out the way because it's in the business park, which is where I don't think many people have ever gone.
I didn't even know we had a business park.
Yeah, there's a lot down there.
But no, you were basically confined to the house for so long.
Yes.
And now you're able to see the outside world. It's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
How does it feel?
Oh my God. So yesterday I was working on the PhD and then I stopped work at 5 and I was like, I've got so much time. I've read half a book. Like, I finished the book I was reading. It was a Dragon Age novel. I'm trying to read them all before the game comes out.
I was about to make fun and say, like, oh, was it Very Hungry Caterpillar? But no, Dragon Age novel is infinitely funnier.
Yeah, I was reading that. I'm trying to read them all before the game comes out. On
Which Dragon Age novel, if I might?
Oh, what was it called? I think it's The Calling.
Oh, Classico. Yeah.
It's so good. I don't know about anybody else.
That's the one with the lad Marek.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who is a lad?
Yeah. Why do I still remember all that?
It's so good. Oh my God. I genuinely, because I started reading it and I was like, these are side note. These are books attached to games. I was like, there's no way they're going to be good. And it exceeded my expectations. So now I think it's really good, even though I think, like, if anybody else read it, they'd be like, oh, this is a book.
I think it's like a distant third in terms of like the classic 2000s video games novel series behind the Halo novels.
I've heard these are really good.
Well, I don't know if they're really good. There are a lot of them. They have that going for them. And oh my God, Assassin's Creed novels.
I didn't know there was Assassin's Creed novels.
Yeah, no, I'm not convinced. I've not met anyone who's ever read one, but there are billions of them.
I mean, the video games just didn't stop.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of games to base them off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The story of Assassin's Creed was really good in the beginning, and then I was like, where do we lose the plot?
I can tell you where we lost the plot, the pirate one.
Mm.
But apparently that's good. Apparently the game is good. I don't know about the story.
I mean, like, you can't... It was so good for, like, the ancient Rome one. No, was it? No, it was Renaissance.
It's
But it was really great for the Renaissance one. Actually, it goes into what we're about to talk about today.
Oh my God.
Because when I was studying history of architecture, they actually hired historical architects to help design the game. Because they're like, well, we want this to be as accurate as possible. So they actually, like, put all the stuff in.
I would be intrigued as to who specifically they hired to do buildings in Assassin's Creed.
I would take that job. You would take that job.
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed Thatcher builds?
No doubt, yeah. God.
Imagine.
In a heartbeat, I would play an Assassin's Creed just set in like 80s Preston or something.
Oh my god, the Reaganomics of it all.
Where just
Where would they jump from though? Because that's one of the things in Assassin's Creed.
they would jump from. I think you'll find Preston has one of the highest church spires in the entire British Isles.
Amazing.
I think you'll find. So you jump from that. That's a tall local landmark. Do some parkour up that. Jump into some hay bales, which I assume there were in Preston. Maybe not hay, but maybe just like a skip filled with bin bags.
That would be amazing.
Is what you're jumping into.
What would be the outfit? Would it be like a tracksuit?
Hooded shell suit.
Is it a velvet one?
No, not 80s Preston. No, that's silly money.
No, it would be like a Run DMC cosplay.
Yes. He also wouldn't have a hidden blade. It would just be a hammer.
Someone needs to make this thing.
Anyways, today's subject is Walter Benjamin.
Oh yeah, hi. This is our first theory episode of the season. And as tradition calls for, we are covering Walter Benjamin again.
Yeah, this will be the last time we do it because I feel like the joke is starting to run dry.
Yeah, that doesn't mean we'll never return to Walter Benjamin. I don't think that will like stop. Yeah.
Especially given how large this text is.
Yes.
It's huge. But yeah, no, we usually start each season with a Walter Benjamin. It's just accidentally happened. But this time it was on purpose. But who knows? Maybe next year you might change your mind.
And we're joined by a guest. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Matt. I am also a PhD student at Warwick. I study how am I going to describe myself today? I study post-war private house building in England in the 50s, 60s and 70s. And yeah, that's what I'm up to. That's what I'm about.
Amazing.
No, so Matt and I met through our being in the history department, but also because we're sort of in between history and art history.
Yes.
Where we kind of switch sides. I used to study architectural history. Now you study architectural history.
Yep.
Used to study wider European history, I would say.
I wouldn't go as far as European.
Wider history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we switched. But I really wanted you on today for Walter Benjamin because you are probably the only person we can talk to about architectural history, and that this has nothing to do with what you study at all.
No, this is one of the things that periodically will show up on reading lists and I will see it and I'll just be like, not today.
But now it is today.
Yes.
It is literally today.
Now I've been forced to confront the beast.
I mean, it's an experimental piece, but it's not a difficult piece. Unlike I feel like his other essays are a lot more difficult to tackle, but this one's just weird.
Yeah, so certainly when you feel like he's trying to say something, you expend a lot more sort of brain power in trying to sort of get through the sort of nomic statements to get at what he's actually trying to say. Whereas with this, I don't know, we'll get into it, but I think I certainly wasn't expending as much brain power trying to work out what he was getting at. Because I didn't feel there was much being got at, but...
Okay, so we have talked about Benjamin before. So if you want more on the lowdown of who he is, what he was doing, and what are his most famous texts, literally listen to the first episode of every single season we've done thus far. But Matt is going to build up upon what we have already learned about Benjamin. So take it away, Matt.
Okay, so in that case, the actually relevant bits of my spiel that aren't just talking about him writing multiple essays about how great having his open marriage is. So quite early in his career, when he's at Freiburg, well, actually, when he goes to Freiburg and then leaves after a year to go back to Berlin, and while he's there, he comes into contact with various sort of Zionist political groups. But while there, he encounters the Jewish scholars Gershom Scholem and Martin Buber, and that kind of Jewish mystical influence. Scholem was a sort of the Kabbalah guy in the sort of 20th century. That has a big influence, particularly on the Arcades project, and also, I mean, probably predominantly theses on the philosophy of history. Also, being miserable, crucially, has an influence on theses of the philosophy of history, probably to a greater extent. Yeah, I think the other relevant points here are, I think his friendship with Adorno is very important to this, because the period of his life when he's writing the Arcades project is the period where Adorno is just sort of giving him things to do because he's severely underemployed.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, he can't get a university job, partly because he writes something incomprehensible about Goethe. That's imagine if your university thesis was attacking the main scholar in your field and then also talking for a bit about how great your open marriage is.
I mean, that's currently what that's what happened at the University of Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, many such cases.
Still a wild choice to do.
Yeah, but there's that aspect of it. And Adorno and sort of various Frankfurt School guys persuade him to publish various bits of it. And if you go to the published edition of the Arcades project, there's a couple of things you'll see called exposés, and they are sections that he was persuaded to write into sort of proper chapters that he could send off to people to try and get funding, unsuccessfully. But there's, several of his major works come out of the Arcades project. So he starts it in 1927. Loads of his work until his death are offshoots of the bigger project. So work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, that comes from it. Paris, capital of the 19th century, that comes out of the Arcades project. And his big, long essays on Baudelaire, I think it's like 160 pages of the Arcades project is just Baudelaire, which I will not be dabbling in.
Neither will I.
So quite what the point of the project was is very heavily debated. Because I think, Hannah, you were saying that you read somewhere that it was meant to be published in the form that it is actually published in now.
Yeah. So I was reading, and I will, so any sources, I forgot to say this to you, Matt, so I'll say it to you now. Any sources that you draw on, we have a reading list, which is just a Google Doc that I put together from anything mentioned. And then we leave it in the description. So in the description, I'll leave this source, but it's from Real Life Mag, and it's them talking about the Arcades project. But they said, perhaps what is most interesting about the Arcades project is it is not and was never meant to be a book. It was essentially a card catalogue, a database of debris. His intention for the final revision of the catalogue was to remove all of his own writing and leave the experts to speak for themselves, believing this the best way to tell history.
Which, insane, if you actually read the thing, because I mean, one of the things that people have sort of wrestled with the editions is that I think I've read somewhere that like someone called it like an oppressive amount of quotes.
I concur.
Like most of the chapters, the sort of quotes that he's taken from elsewhere that are in bold font usually outweigh his comments on it quite a lot. So in order to get sort of what Benjamin himself is taking from this, you have to kind of astral project into his head a bit and sort of try and work out what each quote is sort of doing there. And lots of the quotes are quite sort of uninteresting. It's just sort of statistics and here's some facts and figures I'm going to put in here. And then others are a lot meatier, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, there's also like a lot of anecdotal information. It, for me, and we talked about this off mic, but it reads like someone's in the middle of a research project where they're getting all their sources together and things that they're referencing. And you can sort of read between the lines and see where the train of thought was going. But sometimes, like, with sections and things moving about, the train stops abruptly at somewhere and then you hop on another train. So it is a bit of a messy read. It's a challenging read. I don't think this is a beginner friendly text. You have to know a lot of history and a lot of what's happening contemporaneously to that time to even pick up on the nuance that is being sort of curated and developed. Because each convolute is a very specific point to a very specific time period. And like this, there's a reason why we wanted someone to help us with this, or at least just to break it down, because it is not an easy text.
Yeah, I don't know how helpful I'll be, but we'll certainly all sort of share the burden, because it's the way it's published now. So it was originally, amazingly, it was originally conceived as a short newspaper article about the arcades of Paris, and it quickly ballooned out of control. So it balloons into a long essay, then a book, and then by 1930, he's describing it as the theatre of all my struggles.
My PhD.
Yeah.
all our PhDs, the theatre of all my struggles.
But it's incomplete when he dies, and the full array of notes and sort of half-completed sections is published in German in 1982, and then it only gets an English translation in 1999, which... I mean, the delay on that is obvious because it's like over 1,000 pages in length. But the reader's guide to the Arcades project. So if you'll hear us talk about sort of convolutes, instead of chapters, it has these things called convolutes, which I think, if I remember correctly, it's not to do with it being convoluted. It is convoluted, but it's from sort of the literal meaning of the word, which is, I think it's vaguely architectural. Volute means sort of flowering. I want to say it's something to do with the top of columns. Don't quote me on that.
It's rolled longitudinally upon itself.
Sure, I can imagine a column doing that. Yeah. So that there's those, but within the chapter itself, within the convolutes themselves, it alternates between a bold font and a smaller font. So the smaller font is Benjamin's it's Benjamin's own writings, but those writings still include quite a bit of quotes. So it's not sort of that clear cut. But the ones in bold, they're extensive quotes from the sources that he's drawing on. And in terms of the sources he's drawing on, he is drawing on a lot, because I mean, it's about sort of like a decade where he's just sat in the Bibliothèque Nationale reading everything. And I think the approach he had is actually, as a historian, the thing I sort of got a lot from it was, you can imagine someone taking this historical approach in the sort of 90s. The translator's introduction actually puts this very well, if you'll permit me to read out a bit. So, Benjamin's intention from the first, it would seem, was to grasp such diverse material under the general category of Urgeschichte, signifying the primal history of the 19th century. This was something that could be realised only indirectly through cunning. It was not the great men and celebrated events of traditional historiography, but rather the refuse and detritus of history, the half-concealed, variegated traces of the daily life of the collective, that was to be the object of study, and with the aid of methods more akin, above all, in their independence on chance, to the methods of the 19th century collector of antiquities and curiosities, or indeed to the methods of the 19th century rag picker, than to those of the modern historian. Not conceptual analysis, but something like dream interpretation was the model. The 19th century was the collective dream, which we, its heirs, were obliged to re-enter, as patiently and minutely as possible, in order to follow out its ramifications and finally awaken from it. Now, dream interpretation there will ring alarm bells in the minds of most historians. And I think the text as a whole rings alarm bells in sort of most historians, in that he's trying to draw out meaning, but quite how he's doing that is quite esoteric. Yeah, in the fashion that dream interpretation is esoteric, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I first read pieces of this when I was an undergrad, we read the pieces on the flâneur, which is very long, and hence why we did not do it. But it was this alongside a lot of Freud to sort of go into what it meant to occupy space and walk around space. And what this may sound completely strange to someone that does not understand concepts of space, not in like, here you are sitting in a room, but it's how rooms function and how things are designed to function. Because the practice of architecture is not just about the beauty and the aesthetics, but it's how people move and occupy space. So there's a thing called circulation, sort of like how the heart pumps blood in and out. Architects purposefully design spaces to work with the subconscious of people, of here's the entrance, here's the exit, and how you move and interact is purposefully manufactured. So when Benjamin is going into these ideas of spaces and using this like dream-like state of occupying an arcade, which we will get into what it actually is very, very soon, there is a dreamlikeness to this because he's looking at actual construction and purpose of construction. He's also mixing in his own like Marxist leanings with what it means to live in artificial manufactured spaces that are then pseudo environments. But in their fake environmentness, they're creating a new environment. So he's sort of looking into what makes up all of these different things, these little clusters into a larger thing. And obviously, very difficult to get every single little bit of what an arcade acts like a space. There's many different things happening, especially in the late 1800s, early 1900s, with the speed of which technology is moving.
Yeah. No, I think like I'm trying not to jump ahead, but like, so for this specific episode, me and Paula, I guess you've read more, Matt. But
I read a little bit more.
Yeah. We specifically read Convolute T, which is about modes of lighting, and that's
convolute capital T.
Capital T.
Yeah, there is a list of convolutes that are capital letters, and there is a list of convolutes that are lowercase letters.
Okay, interesting. Capital T.
Yeah.
But we read about modes of lighting, and that was one of the things that struck me, right? Like, it really captured, even though it was only in quotations, the feeling of the space. Even if, I don't specialize in anything to do with any of this, so I didn't have a reference for any of it. But even I could, like, feel the space, like, just to jump ahead a little bit. But he talks at one point, there's a quote, like, they've all got, like, weird letters and numbers for each bit. But T1A was about on the ladies of the cash register all day long. They go about in their hair colours and dressing gowns. After sundown, however, when the gas is lit, they make their appearance arrayed as for a ball. Like, this is very, like, poetic. It's not this happened at this time and that kind of history. Do you know what I mean? Which makes sense from what we've read of Benjamin before.
Yeah, no. So I guess let's go into what an arcade is. Because we've been talking, I think, around this, kind of explaining what the text is. But why arcades? So arcades are more popular here, I think, in the UK and in Europe in general.
There's more of them left here, certainly.
Yeah, in the States, I don't think I've run into an arcade, willing to be proven wrong.
Can I just ask, Matt?
Sure.
Is there some in Birmingham?
There are plenty in Birmingham.
Okay. Because
don't
when I
worry,
heard it...
I'm going to get into my sort of Brummie nationalist thing later on. But,
Okay.
yes, there are several in Birmingham. There's Piccadilly Arcade. There's the Great Western Arcade. There are, I'm sure, many others. But yeah, Leicester has them, Manchester has them, loads of seaside towns have them.
Cardiff.
Yes. Cardiff's just about a seaside town. But yeah.
Yeah, so an arcade is technically a passageway with coverings with like arches either on the side or on the top. Most arcades from its inception have been converted into little shopping centers or cafes. These were really, really good because one, they were sort of easy to build because it was just get iron up, structure, glass. And it was also really good covering for bad weather. So you could sort of hide in an arcade, for a bit, you can get a coffee, you can get, you can go to the butcher's, you can go to the shopkeeper to get a hat, whatever you want. These things also tended to be built near train stations or on train stations, or it would be like a hybrid of the two.
Yeah, sort of near train station. I mean, all of the arcades in Birmingham are near the train stations. So Piccadilly Arcade is next to New Street, and Great Western Arcade is next to Snow Hill.
Yeah, and there's with the Underground in London, there is the arcade in Kensington, which is a smaller one but still existing. So these spaces were really curious because it was a concentrated shopping. Instead of it being a large market area, they were sort of condensed into these little like kiosks. And, it was the place to be. You would walk around because you were safe from the rain. You can stay dry. Most of them had paved streetways, so your shoes, your coats wouldn't get dirty. It was sort of like it was the modern day mall. And, as the text is going to go into, at first, a lot of these had gas lamps, but then with the invention of electricity and the installation of electricity into these spaces, things could stay open longer. So there is this new development of what it means to be a pedestrian, what it means to be a shopper, and what business is made to represent.
And I think the fact that one of the sort of biggest things is the fact that these are places that people go to for fun. It's not sort of, you don't go there when you need something. You go there when you want to see a bunch of cool things. Because, I mean, lots of them had, and there's a whole different convolute about this, but loads of them were home to panoramas, which were large paintings. Later, it ended up being large photographs of sort of scenery, a streetscape that people would go in as sort of visitor attractions, sort of like cinemas became. So, they're a popular visitor attraction. They're sort of the talk of the town. I will say Benjamin, I think, thinks they're invented in Paris. They're not. There's lots of that going on.
Yeah, and there is a specific art historical word that goes a lot with arcades and with panoramas and all this stuff, and it's phantasmagoria. So it is this otherworldly sensation. So phantasmagoria is defined as a sequence of real and imaginary images like that seen in a dream. So once more, we get this dreamlike state. So it seems kind of strange to, I think, people now why this would be such a dreamlike thing. But people need to remember that lights are new. Things were really dark. And, you can see it, I think a good representation would be like a Rembrandt, where you have a singular source of light, and that creates this weird interaction with you and your environment. But with the creation of electric light, one, there was a buzz. It wasn't a silent thing. It went from, the sound of light gas to just this weird electric thing that no one had ever experienced before. Then the quick and availability of it, there you no longer needed one of the people with the gas to light it up. Now you could, flip a giant switch because, it's still the 1900s. But the sudden burst of light, it almost feels theatric. So people would walk around these spaces and sort of marvel at, go, wow, we don't even need the World's Fair anymore. The World's Fair is here.
Yeah, there was a part from Benjamin's own writing where he calls them fairy grottos, or he compares them to fairy grottos, and I think that's a really lovely image. But hang on, Matt, where were they invented then?
Panoramas?
No, the arcades.
Oh, arcades. Gosh. I need to do some quick Googling here.
Wait, so you knew where panoramas came from?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first big one is it's a bloke called Robert Barker.
Oh yeah, that's not French.
Yeah. But yeah, he does panoramas of London. Panoramas are really popular around the sort of turn of the 18th, 19th century in London as well as Paris. There's a famous building that used to be it was called the London Panorama, and it might be the Leicester Square Rotunda.
That would make sense because of the size of Leicester Square.
Yeah, but it was demolished and then replaced with something else. Yes, it was turned into the Catholic Church of Notre Dame de Paris.
Ooh.
Which is the French Catholic Church in London. That was
this
it.
has layers.
I just had to. Yeah.
Poor Benjamin.
Yeah,
No, he was confused.
if he knew about that, he'd exploded. But in terms of where arcades come from, I don't really know that off the top of my head.
It's also difficult to look up first arcade because it's just like for video games. Okay, so technically the first arcades were aqueducts.
By
definition.
in terms of but that's just the word because an arcade just means that it's a series of arches.
I will say also arcades are also usually compared to the way Gothic cathedrals are made because of the entrance of light.
Yeah.
So if you go into like even if you look at like a replica of a Gothic cathedral, there's layers to how cathedrals are, where there's like colonnade?
Yeah, there's a row of columns on the ground, right? And then it goes up. It depends on how big the church building is, but it should have a clear story. And the clear story is a sort of intermediate layer between that and the larger windows. But ultimately, everything above the kind of bottom layer that's meant to let in light. So that's the lighting system of the building. And arcades function mostly the same.
Yeah. So that's why it's kind of difficult to get, like, where was the first arcade? There was versions of it all throughout time. Because the name arcade is also just like a technical term. Because it's what the style of building is. It's not like the arcade.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So that's what arcades are.
Yeah.
That's a long way of going around it.
I mean, I'm seeing that the Covered Market in Oxford was opened in 1774. That predates the Palais Royal in Paris by 10 years. So
All right.
that's a win for us.
Zero Benjamin.
Yeah. I'm not convinced the Covered Market. I mean, it's a covered market. It's
Yeah.
not really an arcade, I don't
No.
think. Because I think that what distinguishes the arcade is it's effectively an alleyway. It's going from one street to another street, but sort of with shops either side of it, and it's covered. Whereas the Covered Market is sort of a building in itself.
Yeah.
You don't really use it to get between places.
Yeah, I defined it as the confluence between materiality, commodity, and modernity. So I think those three things need to function in order for it to be an arcade.
Yeah, you've got to have some iron going on. You got to have some.
From some fabricated glass.
Yeah.
It has to contain lots of smoke in there. Because also, like, we're describing it as this, like, amazing space. It stank. It had gases all up in that. Because, you had, like, very old heating systems going against contemporary stuff that was going on with electricity. So it was a space of mess. It was a lot of people. It was also known for like a lot of pickpocketing, a lot of crime, because it's just an alleyway with like a bunch of people just there. But it was also, once more, like we said before, it was also a market. So it was just like this weird combination of things. And where I think Benjamin's obsession of this came about was, one, probably growing up in these spaces, and then two, just sort of how large they became.
Yeah, I mean, did Berlin have shopping arcades? Let's get a quick research.
I'm pretty sure they did. I know they had
Berlin arcade. Oh, I'm just gonna get like Flipperhalle. No, oh god.
The Friedrichstraßen arcade.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, because Friedrichstrasse is that's the big sort of 19th century shopping street.
Yeah. What I was going to go with this was a lot of these arcades were then knocked down to make way for contemporary malls.
Yeah, in Paris in particular, they were knocked down during Baron Haussmann's reordering, which I mean, most of these arcades were only around for about sort of 40, 50 years before they were demolished for more efficient uses of real estate.
Yeah, and this is like the creation of the big shopping malls where, you know, they were insane. Harrods here in the UK was one of the big original ones, wasn't it? And this is where like storefront design became a thing, where you had the mannequins with the clothes and all these things. Arcades had versions of this, but it was too small. If once more it was an alleyway. So it went from these like spaces of like transientness of going from point A to point B, then maybe shopping in the middle, to spaces completely dedicated to shopping. And you can peruse around the shopping areas, but at the end of the day, there is an expectation that you will buy something. So there is this like weird nostalgia, I think, also with Benjamin, looking at the arcades as like the beginning of this like takeover of commodity culture.
Yeah, definitely. There's a very good quote by a guy who I definitely have to look more into, a guy called Egon Friedel, who was a sort of German cultural historian in like the 20s. So,
as they all were.
Yeah, but well, no, that's the thing. No one was doing like you were doing sort of art history or but apparently loads of his work is sort of anecdotal, which I don't know. I always like reading lies, but he says, and this is really interesting, and this made me want to read more of his work. He says, and for those reading along, this is T1A, 10. We said in the first volume that every historical period is bathed in a distinctive light. Hard statement. Whether diurnal or nocturnal. Now, for the first time, this world has an artificial illumination in the form of gaslight, which burst onto the scene in London at a time when Napoleon's star was beginning to decline, which entered Paris more or less contemporaneously with the Bourbons, and which, by slow and tenacious advances, finally took possession of all streets and public localities. By 1840, it was flaring everywhere, even in Vienna. In this strident and gloomy, sharp and flickering, prosaic and ghostly illumination, large insects are busily moving about. Shopkeepers.
I remember reading that and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, admittedly, I've not read much sort of history of that period, like historical writing of that period, but that seems sort of fairly ahead of its time, sort of like every historical period is bathed in a distinctive light. Like you can very easily imagine like someone writing that in sort of 2010, sort of some sensory history person.
Well, I mean, like, I just think of the Sphere in Vegas. But
yeah, sure. Well, because they've turned an entire street there into an arcade. It's Fremont Street, which for fans of Fallout New Vegas, that is the street that the King's School of Impersonation is on. Fremont Street, they've turned that into a covered. It's not really a covered mark. It's a covered shopping mall, but like it's an entire wide street that is covered in a. It's not covered in glass. Well,
it can't be.
It is covered in glass, but it's covered in like a plasma TV, like a screen, like an LCD
yeah,
TV screen that's sort of blasting sort of adverts for Tom Jones concerts at you.
That's exactly where I was going to go with it. Lots of people are complaining about like the light pollution and how distracting it is while driving, because it is so damn bright. It's so bright. It's huge. Like things like that, and like the Sphere specifically, it's ugly. It's mostly just used for advertisements. It was like hailed as this like marvel of LED work or whatever it was, but it's just for advertisement, and it like is a hideous skyline feature. I'm sure like the same thing was said about the Eiffel Tower at the time, sure, but this one's like a true attack on the senses in that you cannot see anything past it. It's so bright, so it's causing like near accidents, and the closer you get to it, the more pixelated it becomes, and it's not really used for anything. It's just used for commodity. There's concerts inside of it. The horrible U2 concert was in there.
Yeah.
Fish at least makes a bit more sense.
Fish?
Fish played there.
Fish played the Sphere?
Yeah.
I knew the Grateful Dead did, but I didn't. Oh, God. Is it just jam bands? Are they just inviting jam bands in there?
Well, it's old people that can afford the tickets. So, yeah.
Oh, dear.
We've offended a large demographic that does not listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a space of commodity. It is like you can tour it during the day, but what is there to see there? It's just for shopping. Yeah. It is a space dedicated for that kind of interaction. So the entire time we were reading this, I just kept thinking about the sphere and just like how like it just, the way that light is interpreted. Because at some points people are talking about it like it's like this magical thing. And in a way it is. Like you went from like not pitch black, but like from a very different type of lighting that your eyes have adjusted to an electric light that can almost be blinding because you're just not used to it. For now, like, you know, anything darker than the fluorescent is, you know, a cave. Mm-hmm. But back then, like there is a large art historical study of how electric light changed painting.
Yeah.
Because you can just finally see models. Mm-hmm. Being an everyday person working in these spaces and dealing with like this insane brightness also meant that like shops could be kept open later. So like mm-hmm. there's a quote here about gratuity and how like it was now expected to pay a little bit more because, you know, places were kept open longer.
Oh, I was just thinking there's a long extract that maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but it reminds me of what you're saying about this like blinding light, right? Mm-hmm. It's T3-1. Yeah. That talks about like the eyes initially put up rather well with this penetrating new enemy, but by degrees they were dazzled. Blindness began as something temporary, soon became periodic and ended as a chronic problem.
The really funny quote from that bit is it's towards the end talking about sort of the impact of kind of, because I mean electric lighting, electric technology in general is, you know, it's to do with information, and the amount of information that people are being presented on a day-to-day basis is sort of, you know, in terms of products, which you've already discussed, but I want to go back to the products thing. There's the quote at the end about sort of like various sort of business managers and sort of the impact this has on them. And it says, one branch correspondent tells him at 10 a.m. of a shipwrecked vessel worth over $1 million. Another at 10:05 of the unexpected sale of the most prosperous house in the two Americas. A third at 10:10 of the glorious entrance into the port of Marseille of a freighter carrying the fruits of a Northern California harvest. All this in rapid succession. The poor brains of these men, robust as they were, have simply given way.
I mean, yeah, this is Times Square. Like, of course, there's like, you know, Oxford Street here and like Leicester Square, and those are horrible spaces. Do not get me wrong. I want to set them ablaze. But standing in the middle of Times Square makes me want to die. It is an attack of information. It is noisy. It is a guy in an off-brand Elmo suit trying to get you to take a picture for $20. It is hell upon earth, and your brain does shut down because you go into survival mode. You're like, this is far too much information. This smells bad. Why does it smell like urine? Why is there like a Spotify playlist, like download code in front of me? Why is the Margaritaville like filled with people? It's too much.
See, all those guys in Times Square, like some of them have their own Wikipedia articles. There's like the Naked Cowboy. He has his own Wikipedia article. But there's all those guys, and they're relatively new. I think all of the like sort of performers and the kind of, because the one of 2 times listener I've left the country in 2014 school trip to New York, it was still just guys selling you their CDs in Times Square. Partially successfully to one member of our party. But,
yeah, no, they still, don't worry, they still do the mixtapes. They give it to you in your hand and then they tell you it's $5.
Yeah, we found out it had his Instagram on the CD, so we all went on his Instagram and left horrible comments because he scammed us.
This man's like, I hate the English.
This kind of reminds me of less intense, but do you know the new thing they've done at Euston, where they've changed this big screen from that big screen.
Yes.
They put smaller screens, and now the big screen is just advertisements.
Yes.
Why? Like, I know why, but like, so unnecessary.
It's just adverts, and it goes black and tells you we're saving electricity, not letting you know that putting a screen on black uses more electricity than putting it on white.
Great.
So thank you, OVO Energy, for lying.
But no, actually, Euston, I think Euston is a good example, because it's, you know, it's a bunch of shops that you can't really go inside of. You just go up to, buy food, pray that you get your food on time before the train leaves. And then you run to your train because they don't tell you until 15 minutes before your freaking train departs, if you're lucky.
And then you have to pray you don't get crushed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the shopping experience at Euston, I think it much more utilitarian. Because, I mean, the thing about sort of the shopping arcade or sort of anything dedicated to shopping is sort of part of the point of it is that it's a diversion. You know, it's a day out, or it's something that you know, walk through because it's nicer than walking along a rainy street.
I would say maybe then the Bullyard, Birmingham, with the multiple floors.
The Bull Ring.
Bull Ring. What did I say Bullyard for?
Bullyard is in Coventry.
Oh.
Yeah. It's where,
Bull Ring.
It's where the gay bar used to be.
Oh, yeah.
That I can't remember the name of.
R.I.P.
Yeah. Yeah, the Bull Ring is a much sort of better example.
With the stupid animatronic bull thing.
And it blinks, it like comes to life.
I have a personal vendetta against Ozzy the Bull because
One more time, what's the name?
Ozzy the Bull. It's named after it's named after Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah.
Because Birmingham loves touting the wrong things. It loves yelling about how we invented heavy metal. Ozzy Osbourne's from here, don't you know? And then trying to demolish the pub where they played their first gig. But you know, they've got one of my sorry, this is Birmingham chat, but like they've got the Black Sabbath bridge or something. That's just a bridge. They have no association with that bridge.
They wanted their own Penny Lane.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a tourist spot where people will take stupid photos. They want it to be like Camden Locks, but like it's not. It's Broad Street. Come on.
No,
it's Broad Street getting coyote ugly.
But all this to say, there are remnants of like arcades in the UK. I think more than any other part of the EU, because there's a couple in Paris that are still standing, but there's not much left. But here, I've ran into a lot of arcades. Yeah,
I mean, British redevelopment here wasn't, much as we complain about it, it wasn't actually as extensive as sort of European cities because we didn't get bombed as much. And also, I mean, Paris did it to itself.
Yeah, it did it through Haussmannization.
So that's where those arcades went, and elsewhere in Europe, I imagine, sort of, war didn't help.
Yeah, so when you go up to like places like Manchester, there's a lot of arcades still up, and they're still used. Like it's one of my favorite places to go is like the Manchester arcades because it's sort of tucked away. A lot of tourists don't tend to go there. They like go in, look around, they leave. But a lot of locals have sort of like readopted those areas as, spaces. There's not a lot of national commercial. It's a lot of like individual shops. Some better or for worse.
Lots of specialist shops.
Yeah. So I went to like a really good like coffee shop, but like they grind their own beans. They roast their own coffee. There was also, like a specialty butcher's thing that was like very specific odd meats that I was a little bit about. But hey, who am I? But no, it's sort of, I think it's interesting how it's still specialty shops. It always has been. And it's sort of more transitioned from a space of wonder to more of like a local hideout.
Yeah.
An escape from, what is now just car-covered streets. So I feel like, yeah, the arcades were like the last bit of pedestrianness that we had, in a way.
Yeah, and I think in terms of conceptualizing the sort of Victorian city as somewhere that is, oh God, I'm going to sound like a sort of town planning bore, but like somewhere sort of the pedestrian experience is quite important, and sort of people walking about and sort of promenading is kind of essential to the way it functions. Because, I mean, have we said the word flâneur yet?
Oh, we haven't. Well,
Yeah.
I sort of said that I read about the flâneur.
Right, okay.
I mean, are we gonna go into the flâneur?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so Hannah, do you know what a flâneur is?
No.
What do you imagine a flâneur to be?
I have no idea.
One who flans.
I've got the Wikipedia page up, and
Is it not helping?
no.
So
It says it was popularized in the 19th century for a type of urban male stroller, lounger, saunterer, or loafer.
those are all words that you would love to be described as. So it comes about in the 19th century. It's popularized a lot by Baudelaire, who Benjamin is obviously very interested in.
Obsessed.
Yes, and it's sort of. I mean, before we get into the flâneur, I'll talk about sort of how Baudelaire figures in to Benjamin's whole sort of idea. Is that lots of Baudelaire's writing and lots of sort of late 19th century decadent writing is just sort of listing products in shop windows, which sounds really odd, but in terms like people reading this were just sort of like, oh wow, look at all of the stuff we can buy, and obviously sort of I think diagnosing some sort of social sickness as a result of that. But you know, it's in Baudelaire, it's in Arthur Machen, it's in, I'm sure, various other decadent authors that I can't name, but that figures in quite heavily to what Benjamin's doing in this sort of interest and sort of explosion in the variety of commercial products and sort of advertising in shop windows and stuff.
It also came in with people caring a little bit, like everyone's always cared about their looks, but now with factories, you can get new colors and patterns made with clothing and with other sort of materials. So what before would be like a very tedious process of dyeing and construction, well, now you had sewing machines. Now you had fast processed cotton. You had the development of synthetic dyes, you know, for better or for worse, because some people died because of them. But you had the creation of new things. And with that came, okay, so we have all these new things. What do we do with it? So you get strolling as a thing where you dress up real nice and you walk around and you show off the new things you've purchased. Because also this is also the beginning of catalogs where you can actually go on a thing and go, well, I want this in this color and this da-da. Where before this would take a lot longer, but now you can outsource it to get made and then it be delivered.
I think what you're on about there is sort of more in terms of sort of putting on clothes. I think that's more sort of promenading.
Yeah.
Which is there's a transition from promenading into sort of flânery. And sort of promenading develops in the sort of, that's more of an 18th century thing. But by the 19th century, you have the point of the flâneur is that the flâneur is not necessarily buying stuff. They're experiencing the city for, you know, its cityness. But it's the flâneur as sort of identified by Baudelaire becomes this sort of ideal type. And 19th century people are obsessed with identifying social types. There's a wonderful article about sort of people, because people start getting buses, people start getting trains, sort of commuting, and they spend an awful lot of time when they're not reading newspapers just sort of staring at mofos, just sort of like looking at people around them and just being like, I know what you are. And sort of like there's sort of pages of gossip columns dedicated to identifying different
Still
types of
happens in
people.
Germany.
Yeah, it's types of guy. But the flâneur is a type of guy, and it's this sort of young to middle-aged man always a man, this is crucial, who walks about the city to experience it, to sort of get to grips with it, develop a good knowledge of the sort of the mental geography of it. And that sort of, over time, the flâneur sort of persists as a type of person that you should build for. You should build for people wandering. It starts a bit with Georg Simmel, who wrote something I can't remember the name of in the sort of 1910s, I think, saying that the city is designed, or it ought to be designed, sort of in order to accommodate people wandering, because ultimately wandering is sort of what people do in cities, which isn't really true. I've completely misrepresented everything Georg Simmel ever said there, probably.
He's fine.
But by the sort of mid 20th century, it's being talked about in sort of planning documents, and sort of like, you have to design for people sort of wandering around. You have to make sort of perspectives so that things are sort of remarkable when you walk around a corner. You have to put, and it actually figures in quite heavily to sort of shopping center design of sort of, when someone's walking along, what are they going to see first? But it's this idea of the sort of pedestrian moving through, and the kind of person mastering the tools of the city to sort of enhance their being and sort of self-actualization. There are arguments about whether or not there are lady flâneurs. The flânus, largely regarded to be a myth by most authors. They think women can't walk around. Women be shopping. Women do not be flaneuring.
Yeah. We only developed legs in the early 20th century.
Yes.
I was gonna say, Paula, this sounds like you. This sounds like
You
a
take that
descriptor
back.
of you, just like walking around, experiencing the city.
But yeah,
we have done this.
yes, there are. I'll say it. I'm a flaneur. There are many sort of self-identified flaneurs. They largely call themselves psychogeographers nowadays, but
I don't.
You're both well. No, right. Flaneurs. There is no. Again, he's gonna say it. I have never heard a woman refer to herself as a psychogeographer in my life, mainly because I'm not convinced that Ian Sinclair has a very high female readership. It's mostly fellas in fleeces in Dalston. You know?
Yeah.
That's the whole deal.
So what is it? I'm reading about it.
What's psychogeography?
Yeah.
Don't go there. Don't get into it.
It's a dark path.
It's lads who are convinced that memorizing street patterns gives them magical powers, basically.
Somebody described psychogeography as charmingly vague. Okay,
Yes.
Great. Good.
Yes. Well, it's an idea.
Helpful.
It's taken from the situationists, which should be alarm bells immediately. It's taken from the situationists as this kind of idea of sort of turning the capitalist logic of the city on its head by deliberately sort of going against its logics and kind of just wandering about as you please, sort of going where the wind takes you. And then that was translated into, in sort of 80s and 90s in London, it was translated into a great way to design pub crawls, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the most part.
But also, there is, with the modern day flaneurs, there is works on preserving, cities and stuff. There's Jane Jacobs with The Life and Death of Great American Cities, and like the beauty that is a sidewalk and accessible spaces. So these are all things that kind of tag along with sort of Baudelaire, Benjamin, this existence of, I think it's sort of changed now from just walking with the city to developing community within cities. And that community is not just interpersonal, but it is community with like the preservation of space and the maintenance of accessible spaces where, especially as we now have housing crisis, spaces being consistently bought up for private enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of the sort of emphasis on sort of like flannery and sort of wandering about and making the city It's partly to do with community and partly to do with just sort of making the city have some feeling that's not just like, oh, there's Popeye's opening, you know.
How dare you?
Which, look, I'm not a fan. I'm not. It's too much.
It's delicious.
It's too much.
You're wrong.
All right. Okay.
Agree to disagree about Popeyes. Go on.
But yeah, just sort of making it have some meaning or feeling, you know, beyond just being sold things everywhere, which is kind of ironic given the...
That's the purpose of a city.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, as someone that, like, I'm not from the UK. Who would have thought with this accent? But having moved to Coventry, it was one of those things where had I not walked around just aimlessly, I would not have found a lot of like little spots and shops and things that I like to frequent.
Coventry's getting a Popeyes.
As soon as I'm leaving?
Yeah.
Why was it... This is a conversation for off mic. But the point is, you know, that's how we befriended the guy from Gosford Books. Us walking around
Legend.
Absolute legend. Shout out to that place. He's never going to open the door for any of you.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where it makes you appreciate the place you live in. So I guess the flâneur is not dead. It just changes and evolves, I guess. Yeah. I'd say maybe travel vloggers, maybe.
Oh, God.
Travel vloggers is the new flâneur.
I think, right, the only authentically sort of flaneurish travel vloggers are like middle-aged guys who love getting on buses. They're the flaneurs of the modern age.
Yeah.
If you're getting on a plane to Kos, I don't know where people go.
Yeah. It's not the I have $3,000 to get on this plane and now we're going to travel. Like, no, it's none of that.
Yeah, it's I'm spending €10 on a megabus to Romania. Let's see how it goes. No bathroom challenge. Let's see how it goes.
No, I'm actually currently following on TikTok this guy that's hitchhiking from Egypt to Japan.
Now, I'm not an expert in hitchhiking, but there is a large body of water in the way there.
He's going from country to country to country. And yes, but I mean, hitchhiking can also go through boat. You can hitch on a boat.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know how he's going to do it. He's stolen like one of the stands. And actually, he just crossed China.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's getting there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
I saw a guy walking from, or he was trying to
Please
walk most
don't
of the way.
say this.
Why?
If this is the guy I'm thinking of.
The guy who walked, I can't remember, somewhere in the UK to like Ibiza. And he's walking all the way.
You're not talking about Hardest Geezer. Okay.
No.
Hardest geezer?
Hardest Geezer is the palest man you have ever seen walking from one end of Africa to the other one and being racist the whole way. Don't look into him. He's not an admirable figure.
You know I will.
Yeah.
We have gone so far off subject.
Yeah. But I feel like we've been
Hardest
touching
Geezer
everything.
the modern day flaneur?
No, that sounds like
Definitely not.
That sounds like a Medium article. Okay.
I think if anything, our discussion is in the spirit of the Arcades project. It is mostly just saying whatever he wants.
Yeah.
And just sort of free associative, smash it together. I do have an actual point about that.
Okay, great. Yeah.
If we want to bring this back into the vague realm of intellectualism. Surrealism, big influence on Ben. Well, people argue how much of an influence it actually was on him, but you know, this is a collage ultimately. And I mean, the fact that he apparently wanted to completely remove his own commentary on it and just let the text speak to each other, that's a very collage thing. It's also a very sort of postmodernist thing in the sense of just, you know, recognizing these things as texts and sort of trying to get at, you know, the sense of an age through its texts and making them speak to each other. Again, that's sort of very... Again, I don't know whether to say ahead of its time, because having seen that cultural historian guy, I'm just like... but you can see why people in the 80s and 90s were sort of like completely freaking their nut out about this.
Yeah, I see it as like literature bric-a-brac, just like these individual things. And I think you're right. It is like putting them to talk to each other. And in that conversation, you sort of pick up like these like little snippets of people's vision. And you can see where Benjamin's vision is also then coming in just through the organization and the pacing of these quotes. And yeah, it's so strange to call it his when he barely writes in it. I was going to say it's sort of like the curation of it all.
Yeah,
is him.
It's his in the sense of like, my notes are mine, even when that's mostly quotes. I mean, reading this was mildly terrifying, because I was just sort of reading it and I'm just like, this is what my notes look like. This is awful. I'm not going like, oh yeah, I'm Benjamin. I'm going like, oh, Benjamin. Oh God. But it's these sort of big, long chunks of quotes and extracts interspersed with him occasionally just sort of like slipping in a fact, just sort of being like, in the Place de l'Hôtel de Ville around 1848, there was a Café du Gaz. That's it. That's one note. That and just sort of like sprinkling in a fact, or occasionally that there'll be bits where he says sort of, I don't think it's in the gaslighting chapter, but he says something like, there should be a bit explaining this, which I do in my notes all the time, just sort of talking to myself, being like, there should be a bit about this here, which never gets done. So yeah, not an edifying experience reading.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, but not really because it's a different discipline, but there's a book called The Mess of Social Science that talks about how messy research actually is, and like putting everything together and all your ideas is ultimately like very difficult, and less so in history, I think. Actually, it's still in history, but in sociology especially, like we often write about the way we do research very neatly, or it comes across as very neat when actually in practice is a mess. And so I think this is one view into that mess, right? Like you're saying, there's notes being like, there should be this here, or this was built at this time. Like that's also what my notes look like, right? Like it's stuff from my participants interspersed with other people's stuff. And then it's sometimes, I don't know if you found this, like you'll go back and you'll be like, why?
Yeah.
Why have I put these like 5 things together? Who was I at that time?
Yeah. Which is sort of, it's why on sort of one level, I think the people who are sort of like, no, it was meant to be published like this. It's meant to be that. I'm just sort of like, you know, this is notes. This is very obviously notes. But at the same time, I mean, they're very neatly organized notes and sort of tightly assembled in certain order. So, you know, there is something to that. And I mean, also he used to write quite a lot in a format called now this is a difficult word for me, feuilleton.
Feuilleton?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go for that. But that's essentially like just little epigram statements at sort of the end of sort of the gossip pages in sort of French newspapers. And he used to do a lot of writing for that. That eventually became One Way Street.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that sort of collated. And he loves an aphorism. He just loves a little sort of gnomic statement that's meant to, you know, mean something grand. I mean, Susan Sontag, God help me.
Always comes back to her.
Yeah. Susan Sontag has a good quote about his writing style. It's as though every sentence had to say everything before the inward gaze of total concentration dissolved the subject before his very eyes, which I think is a very apt description, because every sentence is so loaded with sort of stuff and meaning that you just sort of like, you could have very easily just sort of, it's what the semicolon's for, man, you know? or like, you can explain this, but it's as though he was going to die the second he stopped writing. It had to say everything within itself.
Yeah, to sort of wrap things up, because we can go on talking about this forever, I feel like.
Probably.
We usually end with media connection. And I was originally going to say the painting Nighthawks by Edward Hopper. But in this conversation and like the flâneur and like sort of dangers and stuff like that, I actually thought it came to my brain M by Fritz Lang, with the usage of shadows and sort of the dangers of modernity, and Fritz Lang's first time even including sound into his films, where everything has a very purposeful artificiality to it so that you are on edge. I thought that would be a pretty weird but good connection.
Yeah, and I mean, the kind of the murderer as urban wanderer is definitely a sort of thing going on there. I'm trying to think. You got me on flâneur films. What's some flâneur films? Not. God.
I mean,
I was actually about to say Before Sunrise. Can you believe me?
who are you?
Yeah.
What have you become?
I love that film.
Yeah. It is good.
And I love, like,
You have to hand it to him.
all of them. There's like 3.
Yeah. Second one's the best one.
Yeah.
No question. No question.
Yeah.
It's like 80 minutes long as well.
Yeah, great.
10 out of 10.
Outstanding. Real time. But 80 minutes to completely dissolve Ethan Hawke's marriage. It's astounding. He gets one look at Julie Delpy and he's like, I'm risking it all. Wife, kids, house, gone. Yeah, I'm moving back to Paris. But urban wanderer films. What's a film where people do lots of walking? I don't know. Let's go. Actually, I have a very wanky British suggestion. It's called London. It has sequels called Robinson and Robinson in Space. It's by a filmmaker called Patrick Keeler, and he's very into this psychogeography thing, but it's framed as on sort of around the 1992 general election, which doesn't really factor into it that much. The narrator is, I think it's a series of reminiscences about IMDb, John Major as self, uncredited. It's a series of reminiscences about his sort of colleague, friend, lover, I can't quite remember, called Robinson. And Robinson is this kind of sort of urban traveller who's sort of wandering about and making observations and sort of, like Benjamin, various gnomic statements about sort of the city and what it means and various things it sort of speaks to. The sequels are less, like, it kind of expands outwards from London a bit. But the first one is very sort of London-centric. There's a lot of, I think flâneur filmmaking is less common than flâneur literature, which you go into a local bookshop in Hackney and there will be a shelf of all of it. Ian Sinclair, very worth reading. His book London Orbital, that's probably the best one. W.G. Sebald, he writes mainly about wandering around sort of Norwich. But he has a very similar book to... You know what? I'm going to lock in my recommendation here. There's that film, which is fine, but I'm going to recommend Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald, which is a very good book. Better than Rings of Saturn, Fight Me, UEA, Students of the World. It's a book about someone investigating the life story of their friend who's an art historian who's simply known as Austerlitz. And sort of going through the various places that they've lived and the sort of locales and how that factors into their sort of life story. Austerlitz is a Holocaust survivor as well, so you have a sort of tie-in to the sort of Benjamin connection, and there's a bit of sort of, I think he's sort of into mysticism vaguely, but he's also into sort of collecting things. He collects, I think it's like moths, insects, something like that. But yeah, this sort of idea of a life sort of being sort of assemblages of various things, and that's sort of speaking to various aspects of an age. But it's a very good book. You can find it relatively cheap in used bookshops. because it won a prize, I think, so it sold a lot of copies. Rings of Saturn, a lot more expensive and worse, in my opinion. But.
Well, Hannah, any media connection?
I was trying to think, but I don't know.
What's your favorite film where someone walks around a lot?
I was thinking 28 Days Later.
You know what? That's a shout.
Is
That's
that
a shout,
not a perfect
actually.
film where somebody walks
Yeah.
around a lot?
Yeah. whole first half hour of that is just lads walking about.
Exactly.
For some reason, I was like, she's going to say Forrest Gump.
No. And when we were talking about people walking around, I was like, should I say 28 Days Later? Is that stupid?
No.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Listen, Matt has encyclopedic knowledge of the most random films you've ever heard of. I know some films, and then you make up the rest, baby girl.
Yeah. But 28 Days Later, by the way, everybody should go watch that because that is a good movie.
They'll probably be putting it back in cinemas.
Ooh.
Relative, because there's the new one coming out that's like filmed on an iPhone.
Sick.
Yeah, it was like an iPhone Pro 15 or something.
We should have more films like that. I love a film where somebody, what's it called? Where they're like...
Are you talking about like the Cloverfield thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love
What, found
Cloverfield.
footage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cloverfield's great. What's the famous one? Where they're in the woods?
Blair Witch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that as well.
Hannah refuses to watch black and white film because she says it's old, but absolutely devours anything shot on an iPhone.
If you sent me found footage films, I would watch them all because I love them.
Do you want to know what the best found footage film is?
Okay.
It's called Lake Mungo. It's on Amazon at the moment. I think in preparation for Halloween. It's absolutely horrifying. It's about a teenage girl goes missing and is sort of, I think, found dead, but it's discovered that the week, sort of in the weeks leading up to her death, something sort of happened to her that really sort of spooked her out. I won't spoil it, but it's a pseudo documentary investigating sort of what happened to her.
I love it.
But it's really horrifying. There are some very good Japanese ones as well. Koji Shiraishi is a director you should look out for. He did one called Noroi the Curse.
I think I've seen this.
Yeah. He did one called Noroi the Curse, which everyone thinks is brilliant. He did one called Occult, is the one I'm thinking of.
Yes.
He did one called Occult and he did one called Cult. I don't know what Cult's like, but Occult, everyone thinks is like really horrifying, and then literally the last 15 seconds is like completely divides people on the film.
Okay.
Largely because of the quality of the special effects.
It's going to be kind of difficult to get my partner into this.
Yeah.
He's not going to like this.
But all of that, I mean, I highly doubt this is staying in, but
Oh, you
really?
don't know us.
Okay. But
Yeah, we can
I mean,
keep it.
podcasts are mostly for recommending films for people to watch, really.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the other, not that I want to promote any competition, but the reason I know anything about found footage films is a wonderful podcast by Sean McTiernan at No Chorus on Twitter and Letterboxd, who did a podcast where he watched 30 found footage horror films, one every day in the month of October, and basically gave himself PTSD. And that is called Hundreds of Pixelated Dead Bodies. You can find it on Spotify. It will be under the heading of a podcast called SF Ultra, but that's fine. Scroll down a bit. But yes, that is a wonderful podcast if you want us to get into found footage horror.
It's amazing how you are so good at promoting other people's work and not yours.
No.
And
It's because the fundamental issue there is what I think has worth and value and is worth promoting.
That you have value and you are worth promoting.
But I don't have a podcast.
No, but you do have a Twitter.
Yes, I do have a Twitter. It is at Matt 2T's PGR Bliss on Twitter. Zeet me on Zitter.
And with that, I guess...
Zolo me on Zitter.
Enough. And with that, I guess we have to say goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Theoryish. We really appreciate it and would love to hear your thoughts. Check out our Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter at Theoryish_pod for up-to-date information, and please rate, follow, and leave a review wherever you're listening to the podcast.
If you're interested in finding anything we have mentioned in the episode, please check our show notes or description to find more details. You can also contact us at theoryishpodcast@gmail.com.
See you next time.
Goodbye.